Lifting outside is one of my best recent rediscoveries. I've done it briefly before, but I never truly realized how nice the atmosphere is compared to something like an indoor gym. I gave my reasons for lifting outside a couple videos back, but today I want to talk more about why I'm doing it, specifically in terms of the actual physical results, which is still my top priority. I'm always going to be an optimal bro and a results-oriented person at heart, so this isn't just me losing sight of my goal to pick up calisthenics or something. There are genuine bodybuilding benefits to what I'm doing, and I'll get into that in a second. In the meantime, I have an exciting announcement. As you can see in the video, I've officially released my first basement bodybuilding t-shirt in collaboration with Barbell Apparel. I've mentioned it a handful of times on the channel before, but I believe what you wear when you lift is more important than you think. I'm not saying you have to dress up and wear a suit and tie to lift or anything, but having clothes that fit properly, feel rugged, and most importantly, help you embody the mindset required to lift to your maximum potential is certainly helpful, and it's something I live by. That's why professional sports teams or any high-ranking professions wear uniforms. That's why I put on my flannel and my hat when I sit down and film a video. It's basically my uniform. Of course, we all know the guys that say the gym isn't a fashion show and it doesn't matter what you wear, but if you told those guys to wear a dress the next time they lift, they wouldn't do it, because their clothing actually does matter to them, they just don't recognize it. Anyways, if you want to grab one of my shirts, check the link in my description. For reference, the model is 5'8", 190 pounds, incredibly handsome, and is wearing a large. Barbell has a sizing guide as well, and a no questions asked guarantee to exchange sizes if yours doesn't fit. I appreciate anyone who orders one. I love being able to physically have my message represented, and of course it's a huge support to the channel. If I'm going to be lifting outside, I don't just want to talk about the changes I am going to make, which I will at the end of the video by the way, but I want to explain why I'm actually doing it. One of my core philosophies to the channel is not just telling people what to do, but actually explaining why. I'm not going to explain that philosophy in the video, but basically, the first benefit of lifting outside is pretty obvious. It's enjoyable to be outside, and it's psychologically motivating. It makes you want to train hard. The environment you train in is important. Over time, the benefits to training in an environment that you enjoy start to stack up. If you don't like your training environment, you'll become more susceptible to finding ways to avoid going to that specific place, or at least limiting your time there. Even if you do manage to power through it, you'll be prone to distractions and escapism between sets. I've trained at gyms I don't like before, and I'd always be waiting for the session to be over, distracting myself by going on my phone between sets to avoid having to exist in that atmosphere. I know firsthand that this kills your gains. Like I talked about in my last video, how potent can your training sessions be when you dread going to the place that you train at? When it comes to the actual benefits of training outside, it's a bit more nuanced when done properly. If I was to ditch my Smith bench that I have in my basement in favor of push-ups outside, my gains would suffer. I would technically enjoy my training environment more in the moment, but that would be short-term because the fulfillment I get from training optimally would suffer and would override the smaller perk of training outside. But this is where it gets interesting. It makes sense for me to keep Smith bench in my program, like I just explained. But after I do Smith bench, I do 2 sets of pec deck. Of course, I can't take my pec deck outside either. But what if I swap that with bodyweight dips, or even weighted dips when I need to? They're a tad less stable, but I've already got a good amount of highly stable work in with the Smith bench, so I use the pec deck for my stretch-focused lift. I'd say dips are pretty interchangeable, and if I can do them outside, they'll win the spot in my program. So if stimulus is equated, the environment I prefer to train in would be my next criteria. You might be wondering what the point of all this is, if my results would equal at the end of the day, aside from just getting to enjoy the present moment a little more and look forward to my sessions a bit more. The true benefit to training outside is to train the muscle groups you typically neglect outside. At this point, optimal training isn't even a factor. Aside from high-level competitive bodybuilders, let's be real, we all have muscle groups we go through the motions with, or neglect entirely. Even look at me, bodybuilding is basically my life passion, and even I just straight up don't train abs. My calf training is okay, but it suffers because I only train my legs once a week. My upper trap training suffers because we're all partially products of our environment, and the vast majority of the fitness industry doesn't even train their upper traps. Awareness of trap training suffers due to this, so it's easy to skip upper trap work, especially when it takes forever to set up power shrugs or rack pulls. The solution to this is to bring more personal awareness to trap training. You might have to think a little outside the box, but of course the obvious solution for me is to train my traps outside. The most practical and enjoyable way to train my traps outside would be through something like farmer's carries, or even some strongman type work. Maybe power shrugs are more optimal on paper, but what I need to do is find a way to train my upper traps more consistently, not optimally. If you haven't noticed by now, a hybrid approach will ultimately win out. This allows me to keep my optimal training in my program. Lifts like Smith bench, preacher curls, and Smith JM presses are untouchables, while I can find lifts that have equal substitutes I can use outside. And most importantly, simply train muscle groups I would otherwise neglect outside. Let's talk about the actual changes I'll be making to my program. I'm sure this is what most of you are here for. There are, of course, the 3 tiers of lifts I've discussed earlier. The first I'd classify as untouchables, things like preacher curls or Smith machine work. This isn't going anywhere. Optimal lifts in a less optimal environment win the debate for me. It's very obvious. The second tier of lifts would be the interchangeable lifts. If I'm able to create an equal stimulus outside versus inside, then the preferred environment will ultimately get the spot in my program, so the outdoors would win. Then the third tier, this consists of lifts or even muscle groups that I neglect regardless of what equipment I have access to. The environment change piques my interest enough to start training them consistently and harder. Even if a standing single leg calf raise isn't as good as like a leg press calf raise, for example, the former would win out in the long run because I'll be doing them consistently and positively anticipating them each session, which is very underrated and something I talked about it might have been my last video. It could have been 2 videos ago. I can't remember. Either way, the first lift I'll be rotating in to start the program is going to be dips. They'll be taking the place of pec deck. This is an easy swap, as I mentioned earlier. The only thing I'd want to mention here is I'll be taking a bit more of like a more out of less weight approach here. Thanks to Alex Leonidas for that philosophy. Since I already have done heavy pressing in the Smith with obviously the stability aspect, things like exaggerated eccentrics and stricter technique, even some pauses, will definitely be used here. Lying side raises will be rotated in for cable side raises. While there's some added benefit to using a cuff on the cable variation, it's not quite enough of a game changer to override this swap, since the resistance profile is the main thing I'm after here, and it's equal across the two. Strict dumbbell curls will be rotated in instead of strict cable curls. I must admit, I do slightly prefer the cable variation, and I can't figure out why. I tend to pride myself in knowing all these little finite details about just lift mechanics, but this one I straight up just can't figure out, so sorry everybody. Usually I know everything, so this is very painful to admit and won't happen again. But whether my arm is I can't really read today, whether my arm is supported by a cable post or a tree, doesn't really matter. Barbell curls I'm on the fence about. I'd love to keep these in, but it might be a bit overkill considering I'm still doing 3 sets of all-out preacher curls prior to where these would slot in. If I was doing these fresh, I could just use 135 for my working sets, but if I'm fatigued and have to load up 120 or something, I'd get sick of bringing out all those change plates versus just 2 45s. Inverted rows will be making their appearance in the program. These are taking the place of T-bar rows. I absolutely love T-bar rows, but the specific machine I have is terrible. It's good up until you get to about 4.5, 5 plates. The foot plates are slanted, and once you get to 4.5 plates, you just can't hold your balance anymore. I love inverted rows anyway, so this is an easy swap, at least until I get a better T-bar. Not to mention, they offer a similar resistance profile, especially for someone who's 5'8" with a 6'4" wingspan. Not going to name names. I really do have the ultimate inverted row build. There are 2 lifts that will be going into the program as soon as I have the equipment for it. The first will be bodyweight skull crushers, but I'll need a rack of some sort for this to rack the bar. Of course, these won't be taking the place of JM press, but they will slot in my secondary option, which usually rotates between push-down variations, PJR pullovers, which this will kind of mimic just with body weights, the calisthenics version, or even dumbbell pullovers. I'm fairly confident these will help the long head of my triceps grow, which is a weak spot in my arms anyways, so at worst this is an equal swap. At best it's a genuine upgrade and could bring my arms up quite a bit. The second lift I'll be rotating in soon will be ring face pulls. These will sub in perfectly for reverse pec deck. Maybe not quite perfect, but it's close enough. There are a few other lifts I'll be rotating in, but come with other program changes like frequency, for example. So let's get into those. Walking lunges is what I'll be rotating in for leg press. This isn't a fair trade when you're talking about exercise selection. Leg press is superior, but when workload is equated, it's not really a fair trade. So this is where the actual programming comes into play. Leg press is arguably the best leg developer of all time, especially when using a variety of stances, which I have been lately, and I've been loving it. If you do a set of a higher and wider stance, a set of a moderate stance, and a set of a lower, narrower stance, your glutes, quads, and adductors will be fried in probably 20 minutes. I'll genuinely miss leg press. What I'll be doing instead is walking lunges, but I'll be doing them twice a week. So the frequency increase probably overrides the quality of the lift's drop-off, or should match it at least. Single leg calf raises will take the place of leg press calf raises, which is another incredible lift I really will miss. But again, the twice a week frequency will make up for that and improve my gains. These lifts are pretty interchangeable. Decline sit-ups will be added in too. They're not even replacing anything. I just didn't train abs before. They're an obvious weak spot on my physique, and training them outside should give me an excuse to train them like I would any other lift in my program. Farmer's carries are probably the lift I'm most excited about. I actually ordered a pair of farmer's carry handles and a couple 100-pound plates, which are going to be very annoying to load up, obviously. If there's one lift I've truly missed since switching to a home gym, it's the farmer's carry. Carries in general are one of the most, if not the most, underrated lifts when it comes to building a jacked back. Farmer's carries are top tier, and even other carries like sandbags or something are decent options too. A lot of the strongman stuff is pretty high quality for hypertrophy. It just kind of gets overlooked because the stimulus to fatigue isn't ideal. But when you can do the stuff outside, or more specifically, you kind of can't do them when you have a crowded home gym. Like I can't do farmer's carries in my basement. You're definitely quite limited. So farmer's carries are top tier, and it's definitely a sandbag carries. More out of less weight, basically option for that. So they are trickier to program though. I fell in love with them back in my high school strength and conditioning days when I do these twice a week. My coach would just make us do them till the dumbbells fell out of our hands, and that's when I first started noticing my back and trap gains. I can't wait to start doing these again, and I'm considering doing an upper back focused training series, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The only other lift I'll be adding in is barbell finger curls. I usually train forearms in phases because they can be maintained fairly well just through arm training and back training. So taking time off training them isn't like taking time off of training calves or something that just doesn't get hit otherwise. So that's all that I will be changing my program. Ultimately, my traps, calves, forearms, and abs will see the most benefit from this, and I'll finally start to develop more of a complete physique and enjoy it in the process.